Hello and welcome everybody to the latest edition of Zurich Talks Future Society. Now obviously that was John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address in January of 1961, more than half a century ago. Clearly it was a very different world back then, but unfortunately we are currently still experiencing many of the same challenges. And today we're going to be focusing on how societies can successfully navigate the climate transition and also ask how we can build a greener, more inclusive society, keeping in mind the wider context in which we currently live. The world is witnessing surging energy prices, rising inflation, and a war in Europe. Now, it's almost impossible to ignore the impact of climate change, something that clearly wasn't even on JFK's radar back in 1961, and actually only really started to gain a bit of traction by the end of the 1960s. So our first conversation today, we are going to be exploring some of the political and the economic challenges of navigating the net zero transition and the role that governments and businesses can play in solving them. So I'm absolutely delighted to say that joining us is a leading thinker on this subject. He's a political figure who has put his philosophy into action over countless years. So please put your hands together and welcome the former Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister of the Federal Republic of Germany, Joschka Fischer. We're really excited to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for giving up your time and sharing your thoughts with us, because you were a real trailblazer. If you don't mind me saying, it was about 50 years ago when you really started the idea that we needed to think about green solutions. And it's obviously been an amazing journey since then. Change is happening. Is there enough change? Is there enough commitment? Are we going to manage to reach these sustainable goals, things like the Paris Agreement? What's your view? Are you optimistic about it, or do we need to do more?
When you are in environmental business, you must be an optimist. Otherwise, you will get depressed, and there is no way out. I mean, to see the inaugural address of JFK, I was 13 years old at that time.
Wow. Were you aware of what the message was?
Yeah, well, it was a message of hope. We shouldn't underestimate that. But on the other side, the world has moved on. And especially since the last turning the century, since the 2000, is a dramatic change. Positively, a lot of people, especially in China, were brought out of absolute poverty. But for the environment, the price was extremely high. When I was born in 1948, 2.5 billion people were living on the globe. Nowadays, we are moving into the 9 billion dimension. This is an extraordinary change. And all these people, based on communications of today, they want to have the same living standard, the same social security, the same education for their children, and they are right. I think this is a huge challenge for all of us. And I want to congratulate you, especially the younger people here in the room. You are the first generation which will have to deal with the challenge to guarantee the survival of the human species. Not the planet is in danger. Our species is in danger. The planet will survive anyway, but for us, it will be a question of survival. And I think the younger generation now has to address these challenges. Life goes on. We see it in Ukraine. There is a revival of great power politics. War is back. Injustice is still a reality. The distribution of wealth is an ongoing challenge around the globe. But there is the biggest crisis, and this is climate change. This is a direct threat to the survival of the species of human beings. And this is the first time. Kennedy had not an idea about that. It was important that he mentioned the challenge, but now it's real. And let me say this, we underestimated altogether, I include myself, we underestimated this challenge. We thought there is plenty of time. There isn't. The problem is that we are on the global stage, we are moving forward, and we are coming very close to the so-called tipping points, where when these tipping points are passed, then there is no way back. So we are in a very serious situation, and this depends on the younger generation.
So, ultimately, climate change is now the priority. But therefore, if you're making that the priority, there's going to have to be some trade-offs, economic, social, political. How do we manage to find the right trade-off, the right balance, where sustainability and the climate is in the middle of all of that?
Well, I think such a big change, it's easy said, we have to decarbonize. But what does that mean? This means to create a complete new energy system, even more to create a complete new industrial society. And there to balance the different interests and the trade-offs is extremely complicated. And my view is we need a spirit of cooperation which isn't there. I was very optimistic after the Paris Agreement was signed, because it's a historical agreement. That's the first time that the mankind, as mankind, accepted the challenge. So I was pretty optimistic, and especially the reaction of the business community was extremely positive. But if you look to the reality today, great power politics, the rivalry of great powers is dominant again. It's a very complicated political game to balance this trade-off.
You mentioned you were optimistic when the Paris Agreement came out. Are you still optimistic, or are you worried? Because ultimately, no one's really accountable if they don't stick to that.
What still alarms me is that in the United States, this is still a dividing issue between the progressives and the conservatives.
Yeah.
Thank God that this is not the fact in Europe. Mm-hmm. In Europe, this is a bipartisan challenge with different approaches, but more or less that's not an ideological question. It's not a dividing question. But we depend on the big states. What will happen in China? What will happen in India? We shouldn't forget that many millions of people have no access to electric power. And they are building, the governments there are building mostly coal-based power plants. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly the opposite of what has to be done. But I understand why they are doing this. It needs a form of cooperation which is against the present mood of the time. That at the moment there is rivalry of the great powers. So I'm still an optimist.
Good.
Because
good.
the alternative is
too depressing.
we will face. It's not me, but my grandchildren will face a life under the conditions of high temperatures, and that's not good.
The divergence that you see in the States at the moment, again, how would you address it? How would you try and solve it? Is it an education piece? What is it that needs to change?
We have this discussion in Switzerland, one of the wealthiest nations in the world. And Switzerland is part of Europe. And Europe is still one of the wealthiest continents in the world. We have to understand that it's not only a challenge for science, we have a distribution problem. We have to help the global south to join this effort, because once the climate is out of control, border doesn't matter. The climate is a global challenge, and without the global south, it won't work. So we have to do everything what we can to improve our living conditions. It's easy said, but it's very complicated.
Who do you think ultimately should be paying for the damage that we're doing to the environment? You know, should there be some sort of carbon tax? Should that be taken on by the consumer, by corporations, the companies? And do you think the government needs to step in to price things accordingly? Because at the moment, there is this cost to the environment that no one is paying for.
Well, this is an old position of environmentalists, that we have a lot of external costs which are not showing up in the prices. So the consuming the environment is more or less for free, or at least not to prices which will change your strategy or your behavior. So I agree to that. What do we have to do? All of this must be done. I think a carbon tax, a global carbon tax, it will be extremely complicated to push that through, because the US will say no, and some others, important players, will do the same. But I think in Europe it would be a huge achievement, a huge opportunity if we could decide about implementing a carbon tax.
And so do you think that should be the next step after the Paris Agreement? Because, you know, that's the time that it needs to be discussed.
It's discussed. It is discussed. It must be done. It must be implemented. And as I said, there are different positions. But I think in Europe we can do it. And
how unpopular will it be with the people that are going to have to pay that price, increased tax?
In the present environment, it's complicated. You mentioned exploding inflation. At the moment, it's complicated, but I think it can be done. It's when you increase the carbon tax, you have to reduce the taxes on a different side. It must be done, because it's also in our economic interest. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's the future for Europe, for European industry? In digitalization, the US and China are far ahead. East Asia is far ahead. I think in environmental technologies, Europe is still in a pole position. And we should do everything to defend that, also by economic reasons. Therefore, the carbon tax can be extremely helpful.
You mentioned, touched on digitalization there, which is another question for you. There's a huge opportunity for growth with digitalization, but also I think there's concern and worry from employees. Are they going to be replaced? Will there be enough employment out there? What's your view on digitalization and employment levels?
There will. But I think the biggest risk is if we don't act forcefully now. Do you seriously think, allow me to bring in my German background, that the cars of today will give you the market position of today, tomorrow? Definitely not. So you have to go through a huge technological transition. And this new technology must say farewell to the use of carbon-based fuel. That's obvious. And therefore, I think we have to do that in our own interest.
And actually touched upon a great example there. 10 years ago, no one would have thought that everyone would have to drive electric cars. But it's amazing when government puts in a policy that they want to do something, the whole industry, multi-billion dollar industry has turned. They've done a complete 180 U-turn and changed to going electric. So it shows once the commitment is there, it can be done.
A few years ago, electrification of cars was still something for environmentalists and top management of the car industry. They looked at you, what are you talking about? And this change has started, and it will continue with all the problems they will occur. So I think with an overall introduction of carbon tax, this will have a bigger impact on a broader part of industry.
Well, Joska Fischer, absolutely fascinating to hear your views. I'm going to pass the microphone across to you guys for a bit of a Q&A session.
I have a 9-year-old son, and he's a big space fan. You were talking about that probably it's the end of humankind on Earth if we don't change. My question is, do you see the powerful people and also governments of that world also already hedging by going into space rather than taking care of our planet?
Or blame the governments, but don't blame the governments alone. I've been in government for some years. As a member in the government, you are dependent on your voters. So you are dependent on the people in a democracy. You can't decide on your whatever you like. You have to take your voters with you. So you have to convince the voters. And unfortunately, it's a hard sell. And now we realize we don't have time. We are losing day by day in the Amazon, in the high seas, wherever you go. We are losing species. We are raising the temperatures of the average climate. We don't have the time. We have to accelerate our efforts. And I think especially those who are responsible in the business community, they must understand that the business is an economic element. But not only. Our businesses are very forceful drivers for change. And this needs a certain leadership. But the younger generation will pay the price, I agree.
So Fischer, what do you expect from the insurance industry? And are you satisfied with the developments?
Well, usually in the past, I was very interested in the risk assessment of the insurance companies because this was, for an environmentalist, this was the best risk assessment about the future which was available, especially in the discussion about, I don't want to open that chapter, about nuclear energy. There the risk assessment of the insurance companies was always extremely helpful. And if you look also to the risk assessment of climate change, I mean, the insurance companies have a clear picture what climate change will mean, what the costs of climate change are. Therefore, I think let me use my visit here to Zurich Insurance Company to ask you to be more forthcoming with your day-by-day analysis about what's going on. And I think this would be extremely important, that the risk assessment which you are working with, if you offer that in a more, maybe it's the wrong word, aggressive way to the public, because these are facts. You are not dealing with illusions or dreams or ideologies. You are analyzing facts. And facts are extremely important for this change which we are confronted with.
So I would say I am part of the younger generation you were talking about again and again. And I think by the time that 2050, a lot of goals aiming for that year, by the time that year comes around, I think I'll be in the age of many of the people here in the audience, of the more important people at least. Well, you laugh,
I think
but
that was a compliment.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I'm just saying I am part of that younger generation. And what would you say, where should I be putting my efforts? Where can I have the biggest impact to bring that new world about that will not mean a desert planet or a ball of ice?
Well, to become CEO of a big company, I think would fit to your personal interests and bring you in a very important position. Because honestly, I'm not saying that to please you because I'm invited here to Zurich Insurance. I honestly believe that since the Paris Agreement, the business community has really understood what it means, climate change. And they are preparing for a big transformation. This is extremely important. There is no change of our industrial society without the business community. Therefore, I mentioned this. But you can do it also on a private level and engage politically. I don't know whether you are a Swiss citizen or what you're Swiss. Well, I think there is an important debate going on in Switzerland. And Switzerland will be also heavily affected by climate change. I don't have to mention the melting of the glaciers, but also the disintegration of the geology in the Alps plays an important role because the permafrost is disappearing. And I think this is a country tremendously rich and successful, but really threatened by climate change. And so there's enough to do.
I just want to say a huge thank you, Joska Fischer, for joining us. Really, really fascinating. And I think it's given us lots to think about. And hopefully we will continue to be as optimistic as you. And everyone will also look to take as much action as we possibly can to make a difference.
Thank you very much.
Joska Fischer, ladies and gentlemen. Well, what an honour to hear from Joska Fischer there on the important role that businesses are going to play in helping societies successfully navigate to a sustainable future and, of course, driving change, fostering innovation and helping deliver inclusive growth are all worthy goals. But what does this actually mean for businesses in practice? How should firms be thinking about a purpose beyond their bottom line? Or, with companies being criticised in some quarters for pursuing so-called woke capitalism, should they be focused solely on their P&L? Well, with us now to help us sort through all of these questions, we have one of the world's leading thinkers on corporate philosophy. She's an academic, who in her best-selling book makes the case for a new kind of capitalism that includes core purpose-led values and profit. Please welcome, live from Boston, the John and Natty MacArthur University Professor at Harvard University, Rebecca Henderson. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear all of your views. You have an absolutely fascinating book out at the moment, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. What a title. And in that, you describe imbalances, as you call it, in the current global capitalist system. Just talk to us about what you're referring to with these imbalances, and also what role does the private sector have in correcting them?
So by imbalances, I mean everything that Mr. Fisher was talking about. We have a fantastic economic system. It's made a lot of us rich, brought billions of people out of poverty. But whoops, we have been destabilizing the climate and poisoning the environment. And we've also seen accelerating inequality. So we don't have the kind of balanced people, profit, and planet that I think many of us would like to see. You asked me what role business can play. Well, it's easy to be sad or in despair or nervous about the problems we face, but that doesn't get us anywhere. The human race is incredibly resilient. We have the technologies we need to begin to address the challenges we face. It's relatively low cost, and business can play a leading role in addressing the challenge of climate change. We need massive innovation. We need to transform agriculture, construction, the power industry, the transportation sector. Who's going to do that? Business can do it. Only business has the resources and the skills to innovate and deploy the technologies we need at scale. And here's the good news. A lot of this can be done on a profitable basis, even in today's regime, even without further government policy. We can see massive investments in clean energy happening all over the world, including most recently in India. Clean energy is increasingly cheaper than coal, even without a carbon price. I am personally working with many, many firms that see massive opportunity in the green transition. So what can business do? Everything. Change the world. Fix the problem.
I love it. That's so inspirational. Let's do it. Let's do it the Rebecca way.
Well, there is a little bit of a caveat here.
Oh, right. Oh, come on, Rebecca. You got us all excited. Go on then.
The caveat is, without appropriate government policy, under current prices and incentives, business can only get us maybe a third to a half of the way there. So we need to make it clear that trashing the environment is costly. If you use $10 worth of coal-fired power to power your cell phone, that $10 worth of coal-fired power creates at least $8 worth of climate damage and at least $8 worth of damage to human health. And at the moment, when I buy that coal-fired power, I don't pay that price. If we priced fossil fuels at their real cost, at their cost to the future and at their cost to the lives of millions of people right now, then this would be an easy transition. Everyone would go, oh my God, this stuff is incredibly expensive and incredibly deadly. Let's get it out of the system as fast as we can. Now, of course, that would create disruption if you tried to do it tomorrow. It's really important to phase that in gradually, to make sure that as you raise the price of energy, you reduce the prices elsewhere, for example, cutting the payroll tax, reducing other kinds of taxes, making sure that the poor don't suffer. But we know what these policies look like. We know how to roll them out. What we lack is the political will. And one more really important thing that business can do. The only way to solve the massive problems we face in the end is a huge political and social movement. People saying, we must solve these for our sake and for the sake of our children. to the degree that business says these problems are real, here's the data, and here's how they can be fixed, business can play an incredibly important role in creating the consumers and citizens and employees who understand where we need to go, and building the political will that will let us put in place the kind of pricing for fossil fuels, the kinds of regulatory shifts we need. Completely transforming infrastructure and transportation is going to require a whole bunch of new regulation. And the investments in research and development and innovation and in entrepreneurship that we need to really make sure we keep having the new inventions that we're going to need to really transform the whole world's economy.
So, back to, I suppose, the point you made, it's very similar to what Joschka Fischer was saying about, we need to introduce some sort of carbon tax, and that is going to come from the government. Another question you mentioned in your book as well, quite a lot about short-termism. How are we going to get companies to overcome the influence of just looking at delivering short-term results?
Short-termism is a real problem. I have more than 20 years' experience on major public boards, and I've lived with an activist in the stock. But here's the good news. We have many examples where investors are absolutely willing to invest in the long term. I was on the board of a large pharmaceutical company. Investors were willing to let us invest in biological research that wouldn't pay off for 10 or 15 years. Here was the key. We had to be credible about why investing in the long term would make a difference. So right now, the way through short-termism is to develop the measures that demonstrate that making these kinds of investments is absolutely going to pay off. This is why so-called environmental, social, and governance metrics are so important. If you turn to your investors and you say, trust us, we're going to go green, it's going to be fabulous, every investor I know is going to look at you and say, oh, really? But if you can show that the kinds of investments you're going to make are likely to pay off, and here's how you're going to measure that, and here's what's happened historically, then you can absolutely move past short-termism. The other key to addressing short-termism is to remember that there is one purpose of business, and that purpose is to create a thriving society on a living planet. Making profits is only a means to an end. It's an incredibly important means to an end. If you don't make profits, you can't keep going and you can't raise the capital or satisfy the investors in the way you need to. But our ultimate goal is building a thriving society. My experience has been that when you are authentic about that, when you really mean it, when you start to act in that way, you generate enormous commitment, alignment, and excitement amongst your employees, your suppliers, and your customers. And that's an incredible way to focus on the long term. The data is mixed. Overall, we have no evidence that adopting this kind of purpose and focusing on the long term reduces your profits. No evidence. It's tricky and the measures are all over the place. But I know enough about the data to know that we've only just begun. We've only just begun to understand what purpose can do. And in those firms where we're sure they have a strong purpose and they're authentically committed to this agenda, they are making huge progress. And they're going to be the leaders of industry for tomorrow. That's very clear.
I mean, it sounds like you've got the answer, Rebecca. But I know in your book, you also do repeatedly say that this is going to take a lot of hard work. It's not going to be easy. Do you honestly think, we are a society that is willing to put in what it's going to take?
I am optimistic about the human race. When we are up against the wall, we know how to act. When our children are threatened, when our lives are threatened, we move. I am perhaps one of the only people you will ever meet who reads History of the Second World War for inspiration. In the Second World War, we completely transformed the economies of every country involved in ways that beforehand no one believed possible. Why? Because we thought we had to. If we decide we need to do this, we can do it. We have to make that decision.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I'm about to bring in two business leaders who will also join us for our discussion, who are going to we'll discuss some of the challenges that Rebecca's mentioned and also the opportunities of pursuing purpose-driven capitalism. So joining us now are Holcim CEO Jan Jenisch and Zurich Insurance Group CEO Mario Greco. Mario and Jan, I'd love to get your views on this, because although you have very different companies, an insurance company, effectively cement and concrete suppliers, producers and suppliers, you actually fundamentally have very similar approaches to your business strategies. Yes, you've got to deliver on the bottom line, but also you are really, really on point about delivering a sustainable plan. Mario, how hard is it to juggle both, being able to deliver the bottom line and also deliver on sustainability?
I don't think it's hard. I think it takes a different culture to do it. I think you need to start seeing things in a different way, that this is an obligation that companies have. As we often discuss internally with the colleagues, I mean, we are a pretty large company. And who's gonna do the right things in this planet if we don't start doing ourselves the right things? And so if you start looking with this kind of glasses to the issues, then it's not hard. But it takes a different thinking. You need to start looking in a different way.
And you get the support from the business, the shareholders, when you have this approach?
Yes, absolutely. Because everybody understands that we're living at times of unprecedented changes. We're living at times of unknown challenges. And if we don't do whatever we can do, we're not going to solve it. And so everybody responds well to that. But you need to switch your mind and look at the things in a different way and feel that responsibility, that you have to do more than just making the profits.
And Jan, I'm sure you share similar views. I know you refer to yourself as leaders in sustainable construction. Sustainability is really important to the growth of your business. Obviously, you're a big emitter of carbon. You've got a big carbon footprint, but you also want to be part of the solution. How do you go about doing that?
Well, I think decarbonizing is on top of our strategy, and the future of Holcim is decarbonizing our process, decarbonizing our building materials, and decarbonizing the way the world builds and the way the world lives. Actually, we have about 70% of the building emissions are from the building itself during the lifetime. So basically, the energy we need to heat it or to cool it, the energy we're losing, and so on, and 30% comes from building it. So we are working on all those fronts to build better with less and making this much more sustainable. The task is fantastic. You have to think about that. We have to build more in the future. We have growing population, we have urbanization, and now we all have that to do that sustainable. So insulated houses, solar roofs, wind parks, to make houses fully independent from fossil fuel. So that's very exciting to do, and that's why at Holcim everyone is excited to be on that journey.
So it comes back to the innovation that we so need at the moment to hit those goals. Also, the circular economy is a big thing at the moment, reducing, reusing, recycling. How are you incorporating that into your business plan at the moment?
That's a big part. So we have already products which are using up to 50% of recycling of construction demolition waste. Wow. So we literally take the old concrete bricks back and we put them back into our products. Okay. It's one of the few materials where you have no downcycling, you can reuse it 100%, and we're very advanced here.
And also back to what Rebecca was talking about earlier, was the fact that obviously companies can lead, but 50% of the work has to be done by government. How are you going to work with government to ensure that you hit your sustainability goals?
We need here the support of the government, because we need to adjust the building norms accordingly. We have the limitation is not our product or our innovation at the moment. Limitation are the building norms which do not allow to use high amounts of recycled material.
Interesting. And how does that then work with the insurance side? Because I guess there's kind of opportunities again when it comes to insuring anything that's built around using the circular economy.
Yeah, for us, we are a service company, right? And so we work with the customers of Holcim or with the beneficiary of Holcim technology. What we see directly is the damages that the climate is doing to these people. And we touch these damages almost every day in our life. So that makes us not just aware, but also part of the solution. And part of the solution is also when we fix things, we try to fix things in a more sustainable way than what was done before. And so we try to encourage our customers to repair or to replace with better solutions than the ones that existed before. By the way, going back to your question before, is that hard? Having a shared purpose with the customers, with the people, it's not hard at all. I mean, it makes our job, lighter than it would be, because you're trying to solve a problem that we all feel is there. And that is a great sense of purpose for all of us.
What about when, particularly at the moment when maybe economic times are tougher? Sustainability, I think, can sometimes be seen as an add-on, as a different objective to the core purpose of the business. So maybe in tougher times, it kind of drops off the priority list, doesn't it, ultimately? What are your thoughts on that?
Especially during a war, right, which is just near us, and you see every day explosion and missiles and bombs, all things that have nothing to do with sustainability. Yeah, it is kind of hard to get people back on thinking about making this planet a livable place for all of us humans. The planet risk finishing being a habit for us quite soon if we don't act. And so we cannot wait. We cannot waste the time.
And Rebecca, I'll bring you into the discussion as well, because I think, again, in your book, you talk about a lot of examples where companies have continued and actually grown in terms of wealth creation and delivering on the bottom line, and yet also being a purpose company. Is there anything that you can, that sort of give us some real world examples on that?
Well, the example that comes to mind is my friend Eric Osmundson at a recycling and garbage company called Norsk Gjenvinning. When Eric first came into the business, people were just throwing the garbage into holes in the ground. And that's not great for the ground, and it's not great for the world. And he proceeded to completely transform his company to be a recycling giant. At the same time, making it one of the strongest companies in the industry with very strong barriers to entry, because there turn out to be very significant economies of scale in recycling. So instead of just throwing stuff into holes in the ground, you treat it so that you pull out the copper and the zinc and the glass, and you reuse it in just the way that we were hearing that cement can be reused. And he's built one of the largest businesses in Scandinavia on this model. Another example I really like is Walmart. Walmart took $1 billion to the bottom line by improving the efficiency of their trucking fleet. That doesn't sound very sexy, but $1 billion added to profits, I think everyone would feel good about that. At Harvard, we have more than, I think it's a couple of hundred cases on specific examples of firms, many of them small and entrepreneurial, building fabulous new businesses in service of doing things a different way.
Wow. Yeah, some fantastic examples there. Thank you for sharing those with us. On a slightly different perspective, do you ever worry, Mary, for both of you really, that there is any reputational risk or political risk when you're attempting to stick to these sustainable core values?
No, I don't think so. I think, first of all, there will be no future for any company without sustainability. So we have to see that has to be the overriding principle. You see that also in our company, we have 70,000 employees, and they are like activists for sustainability. So when we have town hall meetings, in the past we talked about performance, numbers, acquisitions, innovation. Today, we talk 80% about sustainable and how we can be part of the solution. So for me, that's huge motivational. I think the governments, to be honest, they are rather slow in providing the right framework. We had a few comments about this before, carbon tax and so on, which is something Holcim also supports fully, because that gives us the right incentives to decarbonize much faster.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So you're really empowering your employees to be spokespersons, spokespeople about, taking charge and creating it into a green company. Mario, do you share the same thoughts on that?
I do value that there is a reputational risk, and this world is complicated, and the social media have, enlarged the possibility of sending opinions around and, sharing these opinions with supporters. I think it matters doing the right things. We follow the principle. We keep doing the things that we believe are right. We stand for our principle. We stand for the things that we believe are right. And if somebody doesn't like it, we try to explain. But yes, there is reputational risk. I mean, we saw it in the US recently, that companies who have been particularly active on sustainability have been attacked in some states or in some jurisdictions in the US. That's going to happen again. But we stick to the principle and we continue doing what we believe is right.
Final question for all of you to answer. If you have business leaders, political leaders watching now, what would you like to say to them to make sure we can deliver on net zero carbon future?
I would say you have to challenge yourself. Don't be satisfied thinking the old patterns. Think a bit more radical, what Tesla did to the automotive industry, and work with the young people. That's very key. Even we believe the older generation, we understand everything, but you have to go to the young people. There was, I think, one young spokesperson earlier, and that's what we try to do at Holcim. I put the young people into those projects because they have fresh minds and they have a much more natural DNA for these questions.
Fantastic. Mario?
Yeah, this is real. The young people will have to vote one day, and they will not vote for you if you don't act today, and feel the obligation to do something today.
Acting today. Rebecca, final word from you.
Start working. Reach out to local businesses. Start with small things that can make a visible difference. You will see the kind of enthusiasm and excitement that comes back to you. And I think you'll find many businesses are anxious to work with local politicians to make a real difference in their communities.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, I mean, it's fantastic. I am definitely feeling more optimistic as the session continues. But yeah, a reminder to all of us that innovation, change comes down to us ultimately. And we have the power to make a difference. So on that note, huge round of applause, everyone, for Rebecca, Mario and Jan. Thank you. Our next guest is a great practical example, actually, of how collaboration can really enable companies like Zurich to put their purpose into action. And to talk to us about the work of his Instituto Terra, which is a Brazilian-based non-profit that is bringing back to life one of the greatest forests on Earth, is world-renowned photographer and the founder of Instituto Terra, Sebastião Salgado. Sebastião, absolutely delighted to have you here with us. You have an absolutely unique career to date. So I think you started as an economist. Then in the 70s, you became a sort of social documentary photographer. And 20 years ago, you set up the Instituto Terra alongside Leila, who happens to also be your wife. Talk to us, though, about the work that has been going on at Instituto Terra.
Well, you see, when you see all these debates, all this discussion that you are having here, what we spoke here is what we speak in these big meetings
COP 21, 22, 23. Leila and myself went to COP 26. We're discussing about a urban problem. Absolutely urban problem. We spoke now about carbon decarbonization and how you reduce, how you adapt our industry. But there is the other side. There is the 98% of the planet that are not inside of this discussion. You see, it's the rural planet. And we speak about carbon. Yes, carbon is very important. But what about biodiversity? We are losing biodiversity in a very high speed. We are becoming a planet very, very, very poor in biodiversity. Biodiversity is very important to speak about biodiversity. We must rehabilitate the planet. We must rebuild the planet. There is two big variables that we must discuss today. One is the conservation. We'll be seeing tomorrow, we'll be doing a big projection about Amazonia. We must hold this forest in any price. We must hold it, we need it for the survival of the planet. No, that's not true. For survival, as George said a few minutes ago, of our species. It's just our species that is in danger. And a lot of other species that are going, but the planet, keep it going. And how to behave in order to hold the water. You see, is what we are doing in Instituto Terra. We create in Instituto just a pilot. It's true we are planting millions of trees, but millions of trees is peanuts beside the billions, the trillions of trees that we needed to be planted. We need these trees. We are rehabilitating system of water. The only way to rehabilitate the system of water is having trees. Look, guys, when you take a shower, if you don't dry your hair with a dryer, your hair stay wet for 3-4 hours. Me, in 1 minute it's dry. No? Because it's as the nature. The trees are the hair of the planet. The trees are capable to hold the humidity in the ground. With a perimeter of trees, we are capable to guarantee a perimeter of humidity. The rain comes, we hold it in the ground. And only with the trees, we can rehabilitate the biodiversity. And it's what we are doing. We are working together with you guys of Zurich. You are adding us a lot. We are planting a lot of trees together. We will plant much more because with your aid, we are buying land around us to become more big and plant more. But yet this is just a pilot. This must become a model for all over the planet. In this moment, we will be planting trees. We'll be creating programs to planting trees around the world because trees will be bringing money. And that is the point. It's what we are doing in Instituto Terra. And what we will be doing with you guys of Zurich that are in us. We're growing our space of biodiversity in order to irradiate biodiversity toward these 4,500 small forests. Biodiversity is local. Biodiversity is not regional, it's not national. To raise the biodiversity, we must collect seeds in the region, plant the essences of the region, because the ants of this region, they love the essence of this region. The snakes of this region love only the essence of this region and rehabilitate the biodiversity. I believe if we go in that direction, if you rehabilitate our planet, if you protect the forests that we are destroying at very high speed, probably we can create a condition that we, as a species, we can survive.
Wow. What an intro. That was phenomenal. I think what you have achieved is just an incredible, one of the best examples of how much change can happen by ultimately, two people leading the way. And the partnership that you also have with Zurich at the moment, the Zurich Forest, and that's been going for 2 years. Tell us a little bit more about that and what the partnership's meant, how it's allowed you to grow effectively more trees and continue with reforesting.
You see, we need a partnership. I'm just a photographer. Lely is just a designer. We plant in with partnership. To raise a tree is the same as to raise a child. You must take it care for many years. We must hold a plant at least for 5 6 years in order to become a medium-sized tree. From there, you say, girl, now you go alone. We must deal with all the planet, but must be all together. And that is the point, how we can deal together to make a planet. If you do, can be. I'm an optimist, mainly by the younger generation. When we speak about environment in an open invitation, 90% are young that come. They are concerned with their future. And that gives me a lot of hope. I believe that we can do. When I speak with companies like you guys of Zurich, and that gives me hope.
Huge round of applause for Sebastião Salgado. Sebastião, thank you so much. Thank you. No, honestly, such an honour, really. Wow. What an incredible way to bring today's Zurich Talks to a close. What an inspiring example of just how actually business and purpose can really come together in very real terms. Hopefully lots of thoughts that have inspired your ideas, your innovation, leaving optimistic, as we keep referring to. And a reminder that action needs to be taken by all of us. Huge thank you to our guests and you guys, our audience today. And so from everyone here at Zurich, a huge thank you for watching.